So I wanted to talk about AIDS. I'm just going to get right to the main apple scrapple. I've been wanting to talk about AIDS for a minute, and this is just what I know and what I see and some of the research I've done too. But mostly, it's being able to see past the bullshit that's been presented to us throughout the years about AIDS and HIV. Okay. I want to go back to the 19 to a movie that came out in the 1970s. I believe it came out around between 1970 and 1973 or 1974. I'm not certain, but one thing I do know: Charlton Heston. He was an old white actor from back in the day. Charlton Heston and Rosalind Cash. Rosalind Cash, the motherfucking goddess. She played in that movie. It was called Omega Doom. If you look at that movie Omega Doom, symbolically they're showing you what's going to come in regards to the AIDS virus. That was symbolic of the AIDS virus because what happened in that movie, if memory serves me correctly, no, I was not born when it first came out. I was born in 1979, okay? I never saw the movie when it first came out because I wasn't born, but I saw it many years later. But if I'm not mistaken, it was about some kind of virus that turned people really pale and made them really sick where they got fevers and stuff like that. And they needed some form of blood transfusion in order to cure them. And, Charlton Heston, his character, they tried to, elevate him. That was all ritualistic to ritualize and elevate him to a status of being, the white, Christ Savior who sacrificed his own blood to save the people from this virus. But symbolically, that movie was telling you what was to come in the 1980s in regards to the AIDS virus or HIV. Now, let me talk about HIV for a minute because a lot of people may not know this. I keep up and I read, different little articles and stuff, especially articles that other people probably miss and don't read, because usually those little articles that they run for maybe a day that have nothing to do with social media or Kim Kardashian. Those are the usual articles that get a lot of attention when it's on fuckery and bullshit and just clown ass shit. But when they put out an article, the one that they put out a few years back, this was years ago, they said something in that article that really, really opened up, you know, um, a gateway for me in regards to my consciousness and how I understood HIV. And I remember when I made a video about this a long time ago on my other channel. Of course, you had, white people that were coming through insulting because they don't understand because their penile glands are rocks, and they don't have the connection, most of them, to that spiritual divine. So they don't see what I see because I have fucking melanin. So it is what the fuck it is. HIV, see, they always put out little bits and pieces of information, but HIV has been around since the early 1900s. What happened was, them dirty motherfuckers started experimenting with it to try to create a biological weapon. Okay? And one of the first places that they started to, exert or exact or to really start these experimentations, first of all, they started the experimentations right here. From what I understand, these Masons that I knew at the time, I overheard their conversation. I'm not going to get too much into that, but these Masons that I knew, they were talking about it. Well, it was actually one man who I knew who was a Mason. He was my aunt's father-in-law, but he passed away years ago. But I remember when I was a little boy, I remember hearing him talk about how they created HIV right over here in DC in Fort fucking Detrick. Okay? How they created that fucking virus in Fort Detrick in the 1930s, by the way. HIV has been around since the 1900s, but people were becoming infected with it as early as the 19 motherfucking 30s in Africa because they started experimenting, you know, in um in different parts of Africa. They started experimenting on the black people and on some of the animals over there. You see, and then they came up with the story that it came from, Africans or some fucking green monkey. I don't remember which one it was, but they always blame everything on Africa, you know. But the real giddy up was there were gay white men. From what I read, I can't remember that entire article. I don't really want to say it because I don't want to get it wrong. But from what I read, when they started doing a lot of urbanization in the 1930s, this is an article that I read about, that I read this from, excuse me. When they started doing a lot of urbanization in, Africa, French white men started coming down into Africa and gay white men, and that is who started spreading, AIDS as far as, in Africa and shit like that, along with the experimentation after it got out of hand. So people were becoming infected with HIV or AIDS, whichever one you want to call it. I know they're different, but some people say HIV, some people say AIDS. But HIV is the virus that causes it, right? So HIV did not have a name, but people were getting it. People were getting it, but they didn't have a name for it at the time. Now, this was back in the 1930s. This was back in the 1930s, long before it became a so called epidemic over here in the United States. Now, how did it get from Fort Detrick over to Europe? I don't know because, like I said, I don't want to sound convoluted, but I heard a Mason talking, and I knew he was a Mason. I knew he was a Mason, and he knew what the giddy up was. He was a lawyer. This man that I knew, he was my aunt's father-in-law. He was a lawyer. He was all connected to Howard University. He was a well-known civil rights lawyer, and it is what it is. But how did it get from Fort Detrick over to France? I don't know. And then the Frenchmen, the gay white Frenchmen, they migrated and started doing a lot of urbanization in parts of Africa. And then that's how it got spread. Okay. But here's where I'm going to try to balance things out because I don't want to sound convoluted. This is where, I'm able to, see past the bullshit. Now, when AIDS first came out, if I'm not mistaken, primarily it was gay white men who were being infected, who were getting the disease. And it really became an issue to the point where they figured out, or they just said, or they determined that they would have to find some form of treatment for this, virus that they didn't know how people got it. It just seemed to be killing a lot of gay people off, particularly gay white men, because if I'm not mistaken, when it first came out, they were calling it a gay white man's disease. See, nobody remembers that. I remember that as a child. I remember that as a child that they called it a gay white man's disease. And I'm not trying to shade gay white men or nothing like that. No, nothing like that. But I'm just trying to go through everything that I know about this, this disease and what was really going on. Now, they finally decided around the mid or late 1980s, hey, listen, we have to seriously find a treatment for this disease. And the only reason that they decided to do that, they didn't give a fuck about, your average gay white man from getting it. They didn't care anything about average gay white men. What happened was when Liberace and Rock Hudson contracted HIV and AIDS, that is when they said, oh, we have to do something about this. Liberace, he died in 87 or 86. I know Rock Hudson died in 87. Rock Hudson, for those people who don't know, he was a well known actor back in the day. He was tall, he was good looking for a white guy. He was tall, good looking. And a lot of people didn't, the public, let me say that, the public didn't know he was gay, that he was a promiscuous, undercover homosexual because he was actually married to a woman named Phyllis. He slept with women. He slept with Joan Crawford. He slept with a comedian named Elaine Stritch. So, he was a ladies' man publicly. But behind the scenes, Rock Hudson was a promiscuous homosexual man. It wasn't until he played on Dynasty as Daniel Reese back in the 1980s. He played the role of Daniel Reese, Sammy Joe's father. I was a big Dynasty fan back then, child. But Sammy Joe's father. And, people began to really talk about how horrible he looked. He was looking really sick and frail, and they did not know he had AIDS at the time. But he looked very ill and frail. And what happened was, it was a big controversy. What happened was, he kissed Linda Evans, who played Crystal Carrington, on the lips. And that was a big controversy because, and then afterwards, let me back up. That was a big controversy because afterwards, that is when he disclosed that he had AIDS. And see, back then, people were ignorant to the fact of how AIDS was transmitted. People did not know how this disease that they called a gay white man's disease, they did not know how it was transmitted. They didn't know if you could get it from touching, hugging, kissing. And he and Linda Evans shared an on screen kiss. Their characters of Daniel Reese, his character, Daniel Reese, and her character of Crystal Carrington, they shared a kiss on the lips. It was a long kiss because she was having like a semi affair with him, her character, Crystal Carrington. So it was a big scandal once it came out that Rock Hudson had AIDS. And I really liked him on Dynasty. He was really good on there, but he was too sick and frail to continue. And not long after that, they wrote his character out of the show and he died. Okay, he died. Before he died, I remember looking at a documentary about him, or more so like a what do they call it? Not a documentary, more like a it was a documentary, but they actually reenacted certain things, in his life, and they showed how he went over to France. Told you about France. He went over to France and started doing experimental HIV antiviral treatment, but it didn't work, and he died not long after that. So after he died, that is when they started becoming more aggressive in trying to find treatments and a cure for this disease that was seemingly killing only gay people at the time. Okay, that's when Elizabeth Taylor came out, became a big advocate for AIDS treatments, and that's why a lot of these buildings are named after her. These Whitman Walker buildings, Elizabeth Taylor Whitman Walker. There's one here in D.C. So again, they didn't really become aggressive in finding a treatment for it until some white gay famous men had passed away from it, Liberace and Rock Hudson. Now, I got that out the way. I just had to say that. Now, let's get into what the real motherfucking giddy up was. Okay? What the real motherfucking giddy up was is this. See, people oftentimes blame gay people for AIDS. Christians, other religious homophobic people, even homophobic so-called black conscious people. They want to blame gay people for AIDS, but have any of you motherfuckers ever thought? Have any of you no, it ain't because it's not about thinking. Because if you're really a conscious person, and if your pineal gland is really operating the way that it should, you would be able to see what I'm getting ready to tell you. Okay, maybe you may not see it the way that I see it, and it's really not even important what anybody else thinks. Let me just get to the point of what I know. AIDS was an experiment. It was an experiment. They started experimenting with a small group of people. It was an experiment because AIDS was designed it's designed to be a biological weapon. And that's what it was designed to do, to attack your immune system. Okay? They started out with a small community of people. And the community of people that they started out with was the gay community, because the gay community is a small, well, is and was a small community in comparison to the heterosexual community. Okay? And they knew that if all of these gay men, black or white, started dying from this mysterious disease, people were going to automatically think that, well, it's probably something that they deserve. Who would care? Nobody would care about that. Nobody cares about a bunch of gay men dying. Would care about that. And listen, you can have your own motherfucking opinions about gay people or homosexuality. I don't give a fuck. It's not about that. I'm just exposing the experimentation that took place. AIDS and HIV was an experiment that was conducted primarily by the United States government. Like I said, right over here in Fort Detrick, they started that shit back in the 1930s. Okay? A lot of these movies, like I said, Omega Doom is one of the movies that was symbolically, telling you what was to come in the 1980s, because when did AIDS come? AIDS really became an epidemic probably around, actually, I've seen, because when you go and get an HIV test, and I've had plenty of HIV tests, and they've all been negative in case you want to know, but I've had plenty of HIV tests. And when you go and get tested for HIV, especially when I used to go to clinics, when I was in my early 20s and get tested, they would make you fill out this form, and they would ask, had you ever practiced unsafe sex between 1977 or 19. So they probably knew something was going on, probably around the late 70s, but it really didn't become a serious issue until around 1982, 83, 84, mainly around 84. That is why there's so much shit surrounded by the year 1984, 85. Stranger Things. I'm gonna get back into my point in a couple of minutes, but Stranger Things, I have to say this. Stranger Things, that show, the synopsis took place around the early 1980s, and they were dealing with how the government was doing all these experimentations, tapping into, other dimensions and shit like that. Okay. um American Horror Story season 9, the upcoming season, is titled 1984, because there was a lot of motherfucking ritual. The 1980s was one big fucking ritual. Okay? One big fucking ritual. But the point that I'm making is that AIDS and HIV was an experiment, and it was created and designed to be a biological weapon. And it targeted, I don't care what anybody says. I've seen people claim, oh, they channeled this spirit, and this spirit told them that it wasn't no, it wasn't trying to take out black people. Bullshit. Then if that's the case, how come black people have been the ones suffering so much from it? Bullshit. But they also targeted gay white men, average gay white men, who were not rich, who were not well known. They were victims of that shit too. You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about the rich ones. Well, the rich ones are too, but they got fucking money, you know? But what happened was, like what happens with a lot of their experiments, they get out of hand, and they just don't, they lose control over them, and it becomes an epidemic, and they don't know what to do. So the only thing they can do is try to find some form of treatment. So here's where I'm going with this. And I'm just asking a question. I'm just, throwing this out there. How do we know that what we call HIV or AIDS is not some kind of bacteria or some kind of foreign alien bacteria that they brought into this motherfucking world through their experimentation, probably starting back in the, like I said, the 1930s, and then it continued up into the 80s until it came into fruition, whatever they wanted to do. How do we know that AIDS, HIV, whichever one you want to call it, how do we know that that was not some kind of virus that they brought to this planet or brought into this dimension from another motherfucking dimension? You understand what I'm saying? No, people are not going to understand what I'm saying because they're going to think that I'm crazy. They're going to say, "Oh, Sia Grant, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. You know that can't happen." Okay, you can keep thinking that. I'll tell you another movie that shows you about how they go to these, extremes and how they use these little small towns as experimentation basis. There was a movie that came out in 1983 called Strange Invaders. Like I said, I am a 80s child, okay? Strange Invaders. Check that movie out too. That was another movie that is similar to the plot line in the Netflix show Stranger Things. Okay. And like I said, in Stranger Things, they were opening up portals in other dimensions. They were opening up portals in other dimensions. For people who watch Stranger Things, you'll see what I'm talking about. They were opening up portals in other dimensions and shit, you know? And I'm saying, how do we know that they didn't open up a portal into another dimension and somehow in that dimension they brought in this plague that we call HIV or AIDS? How do we know that? How do we know that that's not what we're dealing with? How do we know it wasn't done on purpose? Well, of course it was done on purpose. Of course it was done purposely in a calculated manner because these whites who are, they that are in power mainly, they are cutthroat, they're calculated, they are evil and they fucking sinister, and the only thing that they want to do is continue to be, where they think they're on top. That's where they want to stay at. So how do we know that they did not go into another dimension and bring something out of that motherfucking dimension to purposely cause harm? Because like I said, remember, when AIDS first came out, it was only affecting the gay community. That was not on purpose. That was done. I'm sorry, that was on purpose. I'm sorry, that was on purpose. That was not a coincidence. There are no coincidences. That shit was done on purpose because they knew by experimenting on a small community, a community that was basically discarded and disregarded anyway. They knew no one would really care why a bunch of sissies and gay men were dying. They wouldn't give a. They knew people wouldn't care about that. You know. Then what they weren't betting on, I'm assuming what they weren't betting on, I may be wrong, but what they weren't betting on was black men and gay men, and black gay men and white gay men having sexual relations, or maybe they were. I don't know. Maybe they were. No, I take that back. Maybe they were. But then, as time went on, they started saying that, black women were the main victims of, HIV and AIDS. Now, hold on. We all know about DL and, all that stuff, but that's only the surface shit that's going on. And see, that's the problem that I have sometimes with the black community because we're not looking at what's going on beyond the surface. And see, that is what I do. That is where I come in as an occultist and a conscious person. I want to know what's going on beyond that. We all know about the DL epidemic and we all know about that. But my question is, and from what I see, how do we know again that they didn't pull that disease or that energy that causes that disease? How do we know they didn't pull that from another motherfucking dimension? When you look at Stranger Things, they pull different energies and different entities from these dimensions that cause motherfucking havoc. Stranger Things season 3 just premiered yesterday. Okay? They just premiered yesterday. And there was a scene where all of these rats ran into this warehouse and all of them started to just basically decompose and die instantly after a portal was opened into another dimension. Experimentation once again. So while we can blame people for their individual choices and behavior, people say, wear a condom and do this and all that, and that's all true. But my question is, where did that shit really come from? That's what I'm looking at. I'm not taking away people's personal responsibility, and I don't want to hear that motherfucking bullshit either. I don't want to hear it. Keep it to your motherfucking self. Because what I'm looking at is beyond what we see on the surface. Right now, what we're seeing is the result of something else, that something or someone's else, and I did say someone's, meaning multiple people, had something to do with. This is not something that just happened with gay men having sex with each other. Gay men had been having sex with each other for years, and there was never an AIDS or HIV epidemic. That just came into fruition in the 1980s. And coincidentally, Stranger Things, that show, the synopsis takes place, or the plot line takes place in the 1980s. Okay? You have to look at the shit, from if you're an occultist, you have to look at it from another angle. You can't just look at it from the surface. Because what most people want to do, they want to blame, promiscuity. And that may be true to a degree, but where did that motherfucking shit come from? And I'm not talking to no motherfucking Christians. We all know what you dumb motherfuckers think. Okay? And don't write me about no stupid ass motherfucking shit. I don't want to hear it. Keep it to your fucking self and ram it up your ass. I don't give a fuck about your opinions or your views, because I know it's all bullshit and I don't accept it. I reject it. Get the fuck away from me. I don't want to hear it. Okay? Because you dumb motherfuckers, you don't know a motherfucking thing about shit that you talk about. So don't hit me up, because I'm God. I am God. And I know what I know. So I don't want to hear from you motherfuckers. Go fuck yourself. Point blank. You can get mad, you can choke, you can croak. I don't give a fuck. Simple as that. But you have to look at it from another angle, and you can't just look at it from the surface. You have to look beyond that. What if they pulled something into this dimension that caused this epidemic or exacerbated it? You understand what I'm saying? Because, like I said, I read an article, like I said in the beginning of the video, I read an article years ago that said that HIV had been around since the 1900s. So, what I'm assuming is that at one time, HIV was a harmless motherfucking virus. Okay? Until they started experimenting with it, and it probably caused some form of mutation. And then, not to mention, we don't know what other kind of experiments they were doing in these labs to cause it to mutate to a point where it caused harm. And then once they realized they had the mutation, they started to experiment on a small community like the gay community. That's what they did. They used the gay community in their experimentation. And then once it got out of hand and heterosexual people started being infected with HIV, they could no longer say that it was a gay disease, because heterosexual people were being infected with it as well. So my question is, I'm just thinking, could they have pulled something into this realm and into this dimension through their experimentation? Because see, experimentation could mean any motherfucking thing. It doesn't have to mean that they were actually experimenting with, literal viruses and micro, what do they call them? Microorganisms and all that. They could have been doing experimentations, opening up portals in other dimensions, and something could have got in this motherfucking dimension that did not belong, and it could have started to make people sick. And once they got a piece of whatever that was, they began to experiment with that probably. And then they experimented on the gay community, and then they wanted to blame the gay community for, the epidemic of AIDS or HIV. That's what I see. But what I know is that that was an experimentation. AIDS was an experimentation, and the gay community at that time was the casualty, or the, I guess you can say, the collateral damage. They wanted to use a small community of people that no one would give a fuck about. Black community as well, black community as well. And I'm not trying to compare the black community to the gay community. I'm just saying that they experimented on people that they think are less than, which we know is not true because our genetics are powerful. Just saying. Um, I'm trying to think of other movies that kind of raise an eyebrow for me when it comes to them trying to them showing bits and pieces of what's to come. One of the other movies I think that comes to mind to me actually is um, is Alien. Alien comes to mind too. There's some little Alien has a lot of subliminal messages in it for various, excuse me, for various things. But I also see the subliminal messages in Alien, the Alien movies with Sigourney Weaver. I also see the subliminal messages in that as well that relates to HIV and AIDS. Because remember, they came upon those pods that were like, in like they were hibernating and mutating, but they weren't really, coming into they weren't really, it wasn't really coming into fruition until they really started fucking with them, and that's when it started hatching. You know what I'm saying? So when I think of the movie Alien, that also kind of shows me subliminally what they were talking about or what they were trying to tell people in a subliminal way in regards to AIDS. And remember, Alien came out in 1979. The first Alien came out in 1979. Another movie that talks about AIDS or HIV in a subliminal manner is the Andromeda Strain. That came out in the early 70s, and I think that was even before um, the Omega Doom. So, check out those movies. I mean, that's what I see. That's what I see. I can only go by what I know and what I see. I don't give a fuck what nobody else think. I'm not here for competition. I only see and know what I know. And what I know is that AIDS was an experiment, and the first community that they experimented on was the gay community. And there were a lot of gay black men that died in that, experiment as well. That experiment went on for many, many years. A lot of the black gay men in the movie Paris is Burning, a lot of the black gay men in that movie, they were taken out. They were taken out. They were infected with AIDS. I remember Bobby Hemmett did a entire lecture where he was talking about. Well, he didn't. The entire lecture was not about Paris is Burning, but he mentioned how they took them out. Mr. Hemmett even talked about that, how they took them out. Okay, so AIDS was an experiment, and they started experimenting on the gay community first, and that is why the gay community gets blamed for, so-called AIDS. Okay, they definitely took out a lot of gay black men. They definitely took out a lot of us in the AIDS epidemic, most definitely. And that is because a lot of gay black men were gatekeepers. And see, that's another thing too that I haven't said anything about that in this video, but that's another thing too. They targeted gatekeepers and anybody that was around them because a lot of gay black men are gatekeepers. Not all, but a lot of us are gatekeepers in the spiritual realm. A lot of us are, but we don't recognize our power and our divinity of who we really are because we're too busy, bogged down, and we're too busy distracted by this low vibrational shit that they put in front of our face. You know what I'm saying? Like trying to get black men You know, like how some gay black men competing with black women and all that old bullshit that's going on right now, which is nothing but a distraction and nothing but some motherfucking bullshit. There's no way a penis can compete with a vagina. Let me say that right now. Okay? There's no way I can compete with my mother. She birthed me. There's no way I can compete with another woman because I go to women for spiritual guidance. Maybe one or two men I may talk to, but I go to you we go to women for spiritual guidance because the woman, the black woman, let me be clear about that. The black woman is the priest and the motherfucking priestess. So there's no way that I would ever put myself in an energy saying that I'm competing with the black goddess. And I'm not talking to all black women. I'm only talking to those black women it applies to. Because of that word goddess and queen has been used and misused, and every black woman does not deserve that title. Okay? I'm just keeping it motherfucking real. Just like every gay man doesn't deserve the title of being a gatekeeper because every gay man is not a gatekeeper. Every gay black man is not a gatekeeper. And what differentiates between that is that gatekeepers, we usually cultivate our spiritual side. Regular gay men, they cultivate the world. They're more into the materialistic, aspect of the world. Okay, so that's like that Horus and Set, you know, what do they call it? Feud. Okay, so no, that's a whole nother video. But you know, all of that shit is distractions. All of that is distractions. But anyway, I just wanted to come through and I wanted to get that off my chest. I wanted to talk about that. I did. Hope you enjoyed the video, and that's all I really have to say. Thank you.